We have a special panel for you tonight. We are talking about why size inclusion and body positivity are good for your mental health. And we have three amazing panelists and our special guest moderator, Natalie, who I actually want to read Natalie's bio because we were just talking about how great her bio is. I'm just going to read part of it, okay? So Natalie says she's a storyteller, a plant mother, a marathoner, a triathlete, Team USA member, lover of fine food and libations, body positivity advocate, nerd, self-proclaimed, lizard mom, and godmother to an awesome dog. Like, how great is that? Love that bio. We also have Mel on with us, who is with Project Healthy Mind. So I'm actually going to pass the mic to Mel first to just give us a little background on Project Healthy Mind, and then we'll get into our panel.
Thanks, Kelly. Can everyone hear me okay? So for those of you who aren't familiar with Project Healthy Minds, I'm happy to provide a little bit of context. So 600 million people worldwide are diagnosed with some sort of mental health condition, the vast majority of which are anxiety disorders and depression. But among those who are diagnosed, only 40% get the help that they need. And we believe that the 60% treatment gap is driven by three primary causes. So the first and biggest is the stigma of mental health. The second is that even as we overcome this stigma, many people don't know where to find resources or are faced with this like choice paralysis on the World Wide Web. And then the third is structural, which is about access to care. So at Project Healthy Minds, our focus is to address these three causes. So our first goal is to shatter the stigma of mental health, and our second goal is to make it easier for people to find mental health services. And then there's our second phase of work, which is to tackle the third bucket, which is to build programs and partnerships that expand access to care and to ensure that mental health really is considered a priority by employers around the country. So I encourage all of you to visit our website, which is www.projecthealthyminds.com, to learn more about our mission and hopefully to get involved in our work if some of the open volunteer opportunities interest you. We're also very online, as they say, so please follow us on Instagram at Project Healthy Minds. And as you can imagine, we've stayed very busy in May with some great programming around Mental Health Awareness Month, which is sort of our Super Bowl, so to speak. And I specifically encourage you all to join one of our upcoming virtual community events, which is centered around body positivity, which will be at 7 p.m. Eastern Time next Wednesday and has some pretty remarkable guests featured. So Rachel Schultz and I can share more details after the panel. But before I wrap, I do really want to express a heartfelt thank you specifically to Dr. Marisa Toups, who has done some exceptional work with Project Healthy Minds as a clinical advisor, and who we will have the privilege of hearing from today among our other panelists. And Marisa is a board-certified psychiatrist with an interest in the intersection of physical and mental health, and she's also a wonderful human being. So I am thrilled to have her here with all the other panelists who I'm excited to meet. And with that, I will pass it back to the Spotlight team.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Mel, and thank you for being here. That was great. I am now going to highlight the rest of the panelists and let Natalie moderate from here. And take it away, Natalie.
All right. Well, no need to introduce myself. You guys got a good background of who I am. So if we could start with you, Marisa, if you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so I'm a psychiatrist, and I am specially trained in treating patients with complicated depression, but try to serve all of my patients across their spectrum of needs. And I have a particular interest in how physical health and mental health are related to each other, and do a lot of work in things like exercise, diet, talking about inflammation, and all kinds of other issues that people find are important in their mental health. And I'm delighted to get to be here today and work with all of you guys.
Awesome. Excited to have you. Gianluca, if you want to talk a little bit about yourself, do a quick intro.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Gianluca Russo. I am a fashion and culture writer and the founder at the Power of Plus, which is a size-inclusive digital community aimed at promoting respect and style for all bodies. I run a column at Nylon called Plus Us that kind of talks about the discrimination towards plus-size bodies today and what it's like to navigate the world in a larger body. And a lot of my work centers on the intersection of size with culture and representation.
Awesome. Thank you. Excited to see you again. And then Charlotte, if you want to give an intro to yourself as well.
Yeah, I'm Charlotte Oxnam. I'm the founder of Cue the Curves. Like Gianluca, our goal is to really support plus size women specifically in their experiences around fashion and shopping and reinvent that process. We are an online app and website that allows conversations around clothing brands and discoveries so that plus size women can truly discover their own style by being given options for lots of different clothing.
Awesome. Thank you. So just to kind of set the tone and get things started, something I did want to touch on before we kind of dig into like the meat and potatoes, so to speak, if we could kind of touch about language and how that intersects with mental health as it concerns bodies and body positivity. So Charlotte, this is something we kind of talked about. So if you want to get started on that.
Yeah, I think it's really important the words we're using when we're describing ourselves and describing others. Terms like fat are terms that in recent years have really been taken back by the plus size community in certain ways, but are still used in negative connotations in other ways. I personally choose to use plus size to describe myself and others like me. But it is really important that we're using language that is respectful and honoring of other people versus using words that are descriptors, but instead using them as a way to pull people down.
If anybody else has other stuff to add, by the way, feel free to jump in. All right, cool. So I thought a good way to kind of get the conversation started would be to talk about something that was a recurring theme in all of these conversations, which is really about journey. So, you know, everybody, whether you're plus size, straight size, whatever the case may be, we're all on a different journey of accepting our own bodies and how that relates to our mental health. So Gianluca, if you want to kind of get us started on maybe like talking about journey and how that relates to mental health and, you know, the importance of honoring not only your own journey, but that of others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what happens so often when we're talking about body positivity or self-love or any kind of these related topics is that so often we focus on a destination and a singular point to reach and to work towards. When rather I think it's more healthier and more just attainable when we focus on the journey aspect. And I think one of the best parts of being a human is getting to go on that journey. And of course, that looks different for all of us. It doesn't matter what size you are or who you are or your background. All of us go on our own individual personal journeys, and they're all going to look different. But we need to be able to give ourselves the space to really enjoy that journey and to feel those emotions and to remember that sometimes the journey is going to be great and we're going to hit those milestones and those really great moments. And then at other times we'll sink and it'll be darker moments. But every step is still a step forward. And I think that's what I try to focus on in my own mental health journey, and I know others as well, is that instead of viewing something as a step forward or a step back, I try to change my mindset to just view it as another chapter, right? So the chapters continue. It's nothing forward or back. It's just towards the larger story that's being written about yourself. So I think the more that we give ourselves the space to really focus on the journey aspect here, the more kind of love we can extend to ourselves and giving ourselves the time and the energy to really grow into the person we want to become rather than feeling like we can never reach this kind of unattainable ideal at the end of perfect body positivity.
Absolutely. Charlotte, I know you probably have some stuff to add to that as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything Gianluca just said. I think the other thing is in terms of other people, I think there's such a nature to compare ourselves with where we are on our journey versus where other people are on their journey. And what I have to remind myself, and I try to remind others, is that we also all started at different places. I know for me, especially growing up as a plus size girl, I had a lot of issues with my body image that sort of pulled me back behind the group almost. And I felt like everyone was like getting to loving themselves faster. It was so much easier for them. And that made it really hard for my personal journey. So recognizing that I had those sort of extra weight been pulled back a little bit in the race, so to speak, helped me a lot to realize that it needed to be about my individual journey and not about comparing where I was with myself to where other people's were with themselves.
Absolutely. And also recognizing that, you know, other people's journeys and kind of being respectful of where they're going, because like there's this expectation that people need to stay a certain way and that they're like, this is how I met them. And so this is what they need to be forever. And people are allowed to grow and change and evolve and become different things. And, you know, that could manifest itself in a lot of different ways, but, you know, also holding space for those people in their journeys. Marisa, I don't know if you have anything you want to add into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times when it's about your relationship with yourself, and like any other relationship, you don't like, sometimes you're annoyed with your, you know, if you're married, you're not going to go 50 years and never be annoyed with your husband. And sometimes you're going to be annoyed with yourself and you're not always going to feel positive all the time, every day. But that doesn't mean that you are not in a long-term committed relationship with yourself to love yourself as good as you can. So I definitely have people, we talk a lot about sometimes that being positive feels like a burden. It's not always easy, and that's okay too.
Yeah, I think also the social media aspect of it all, in that people share their lives in different ways.
Yeah.
And recognizing that what you're seeing isn't the whole picture always. I am someone who have chosen to sort of put my life out and my struggles out on the internet, but not everyone does that. And recognizing that and recognizing what you think is going on with someone is not always what's actually going on with someone, and that there's a lot that's happening behind the screen, behind the conversations you're having, and respecting and honoring that as well.
And I think there's kind of this important aspect to remember is that a majority of people are putting out a highlight reel on social media, right? Like it's not the full picture. It's a very curated look into the best parts of their lives. And so even the people who are more authentic and share more of the, 360 in the entire picture, it kind of the flip side to that is then the pressure to always be authentic. And what does that mean? So on both sides, there's really this kind of pressure of either looking perfect all the time, or how do I look imperfect and be relatable? And so on both sides, there's really a lot to navigate. So I think it's important to also remember the balance there and realizing how it can affect you and shape you, and really figuring out what exactly works for you and makes you feel the best, because the way it is for someone else is going to be so different. And social media is great for many reasons, but worse for many others. And so it's important to kind of figure out that balance.
Yeah, for sure. That, by the way, like being in a long-term relationship with yourself, that's going to be like my like buzz sentence that I'm going to keep from this, because that's just like such a good way to put it that I hadn't thought of. So, but that being said, in terms of like finding balance, and this is also kind of something that you said about like, it's not always going to be positive, to kind of talk about body neutrality, right? So we have this idea of body positivity, like love yourself and, like point out things that you really like about your body or whatever the case may be. And sometimes it's just a matter of existing, right? Like I'm proud of my body. Today I was able to walk a mile or whatever the case may be, like celebrating what your body can do rather than what your body looks like, and kind of reframing the way that you celebrate yourself. So we'll start with Charlotte for this one.
Yeah, I was talking about this with someone the other day, and I think a sentence that really hit home to me was that I'm working towards body positivity, but that also means working out of body negativity, and that there's a journey there and a path, and we don't all start at neutral. And so I really like having body neutrality as sort of this beautiful middle step that feels really attainable and real. And when I get in those spaces where I'm really down on myself, instead of trying to force myself to almost fake it till I make it of loving myself, I can reframe and look at myself as my body is letting me do what I want to do. And it's about me as a person and me as a soul versus me physically and the space I'm taking up and how I look. And that is a lot easier of a mind frame to get into than to jump all the way into my body's perfect, I love every part of it. So I think it's a really important phase to be able to be in and stage to get to, that can break out of those negative cycles.
For sure. And if anybody else has thoughts on that as well, feel free to jump in.
I think there's a huge value to just acceptance. Like the way you're talking about is being neutral. And if that's where you are, you can't get anyplace else if you're not standing firmly on the place that you are right today. And so sometimes the place that you are today is mixed up or hard or difficult, but that's how you start to move. You have a nice place to push off of when you are honest with yourself. And sometimes honesty is about some things that you don't like.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'm hoping you can kind of elaborate on, Gianluca, is about this idea of self-worth, right? Like that worth never goes away. So you might not have the self-love all the time, but you're still worthy. If you want to, you put it a lot better than I did. So I'll let you get into that.
Yeah, well, I think body neutrality is great for a lot of people. And I think it's much more attainable and relatable for a lot of people than what body positivity has become. Because we've seen body positivity become really commercialized in a lot of ways. And so body neutrality feels much more relevant to people and much more within reach for those who really want to work on this journey. But I think the important thing to remember with body neutrality, and this is what I take away from it in my own personal life, is to focus on the fact that however you feel about yourself one day, that will waver. But regardless of that, your worth will always remain the same, if not increase, as you do more and become greater. And so that's what I really try to focus on here is I think so often we view ourselves so negatively and so harshly, more so than outside people do. And so often we talk about the way that society treats us, but the way that we treat ourselves is often why we view ourselves as less worthy. So even when we're given opportunities, we might feel like, oh, we're not worthy of it, even if we're receiving outside, praise for it, and we're getting these opportunities, but we feel like we're not worthy because of the way we view ourselves. So I think that's a really important aspect of body neutrality is learning that your worth will always remain the same, no matter how you feel about yourself, no matter what's happening externally. And when you're able to do that, you're still able to give yourself the space and the confidence to step into your own lane. And I think that's an important part of the journey towards working towards being body positive and having a good grasp on self-love is realizing that your worth is the most important thing that you should always be holding on to.
1,000,000%. So kind of also with that conversation, there's a lot of bias, right? Especially as it relates to people in larger bodies. And so this is something I'm hoping, Marisa, you can kind of expound upon a little bit more, that there's also this misconception that like people in larger bodies don't experience the same things as, smaller people, that they don't have eating disorders or things like that. There's a lot of, bias there. So if you can kind of touch on that a little bit.
Yeah. And so it is actually really tragic to me talking to patients. And so particularly when I've had patients who have had really serious problems with food and have sometimes then been like morbidly obese and then recovered from that and their weight has normalized somewhat, all the time they have a horrible experience of realizing how differently they're treated when their body changes. And it's really horrible that happens to people. I mean, it is so consistent that it does. And I think the idea of internalizing that is just so important because people walk around believing about themselves what they have had reflected to them. There's not maybe much that any of us can do in an instant about the biases that other people have towards us, but being aware of how you might be carrying those biases around inside can make a huge difference in recognizing your value and being able to value yourself.
Yeah, especially when you have people who, like, I joked about this yesterday, that think that they have like a Google PhD and they're like, well, you have a larger body, so clearly you must be unfit or unhealthy and not have any kind of medical background. And so we, this idea of health is sort of elusive because like, what does that really mean?
Yeah, I mean, I hear people who are very like accomplished professionals, they get passed over, and people who are the expert, and other people will treat them as if they don't know anything, and that can be really demoralizing for that to happen.
Absolutely. So to kind of pivot towards a more like positive, channeling that. So back to you guys, Charlotte and Gianluca, kind of, I guess, what was the catalyst for what you decided to do, how you sought out and then built a community to really kind of work towards more positive changes. So if Gianluca, you want to get started?
Sure, yeah. Before I launched my community, I was constantly having conversations with people from within the plus size community and within the curvy space to really kind of understand the shared issues and the shared feelings that we all have, and to really tell the stories of all these incredible women who for so long had kind of been rejected from the mainstream and whose stories weren't being told. And I felt like there needed to be a space for everyone to come together to just talk and to express and feel seen. And we've definitely seen success on the internet for similar spaces of other marginalized communities. And so I was in conversation with my close friends about it, and we just thought that creating a space where we could have really impactful conversations around racism in the plus size industry and colorism and body neutrality and similar things would be such a great moment. And so we kind of pulled this community idea together and worked on it. And we received so much support over the past year. And it's been really great because we've been able to connect with so many people internationally who just want a place to feel seen and just want a place to talk. And I think that's what so many of us just want, is to just talk for a little and just feel like we're being actually heard and really represented. Because I think so often in the fashion industry, there's this smoke screen of fake representation that goes up where they're like, oh, we'll put Ashley Graham on this cover and you're good. And it's like, okay, but where's like the real representation, like the true representation? And so that's what people are craving so much nowadays. And so kind of our goal with our community is to be able to provide that for them and to provide a real resource. And then of course, in addition to the kind of the representation aspect, we have so many other things we, are doing and plan to do in terms of providing resources for, mental health care, eating disorder care, weight discrimination care, all these other kind of everyday struggles that you wouldn't realize unless you live in a larger marginalized body, but that people within our community face every day. So our goal is to become a place where people can go to have conversation and to find really valuable resources that before now haven't been so easily available.
Yeah, and also, which I know you didn't mention it, but we talked about it yesterday, that also within that is like amplifying those voices, right? Like that, giving a platform to people that might not always have one is such an important piece of that as well, that you guys are doing an amazing job with. Charlotte, if you want to talk about yours as well.
I describe Cue the Curves as a gift to sort of my younger self. I designed it really around this core issue I was experiencing of feeling super isolated when it came to clothing and fashion. It's sort of the quintessential plus size experience. It's one of the key ways that we're getting pushed to the outside. And I struggled so much growing up in middle school and in high school, not being able to dress like my friends, not being able to go to the same stores, and all of the different sort of emotional journeys that came with that. So I built Cue the Curves originally as just a clothing directory for a way for younger plus size women to be able to find trendy and cute clothes and maybe smaller brands that they hadn't been exposed to before. And from there, we've grown into this platform to then have conversations around these brands and really hold them accountable, both the smaller brands and the larger brands who have dominated the space for so long without really listening and internalizing plus size perspectives and opinions on their products. We're seeing a lot of really big mass market retailers where a lot of our users are talking about how much they dislike them, but they feel like they have no other option. And so they're forced into supporting them and forced into buying their clothes anyways. So we're trying to give both the options of finding other stores, really finding your style and clothes that you love, as well as holding these bigger brands and more established brands accountable when they're not serving the plus size community well.
Yeah, definitely. And there's such a huge connection between that experience of shopping fashion clothing and its impact on your mental health. Because me as an athlete, I was super excited the first time I qualified for Team USA. I had been working towards it for years. I had set a goal for myself and I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it. It's going to be great. It's going to be the greatest experience. And I was on cloud 9 when I found out that I qualified, and that all came crashing down the day that I had to order my uniform. So they only go up to a 2X, and there was only one option. It was an open back one piece. And I was like, okay, I'll on a hope and a prayer, I'll order this and see how it goes. And when it came in, I joked to friends, but I actually cried when I tried it on. But I was joking. I was like, oh, it was harder to get into this kit than it was to qualify for Team USA. And it legitimately, I was afraid that if I farted, it would just turn to shreds because it was so tight on my body. And I just sat in my bed and I cried. I was like, how am I going to compete in this? I can barely get my body into it. And if it doesn't fit, like I can't compete. There's no larger size. And you have to have the team kit in order to compete in a world championship. So it was really devastating. And I struggled with like, I should be excited because I qualified for Team USA and I'm going to have this amazing experience. But then to, on the flip side, have something that's ill-fitting and there weren't any other options. Like I had a really difficult time with that and didn't have anybody that I could really talk through that with. It was just like, it's a big thing. And so I understand when people are like, oh, I'm frustrated, this didn't fit the way I wanted to. And I'm like, yeah, but you have options like that. At least you found something that did fit. And even from a safety perspective, when it comes to like sporting and outdoors, like even when it comes to like flotation devices, those only go up to a certain size. And so a lot of larger bodied people, even for safety reasons, are kept from those experiences simply because there aren't enough, safety equipment things that are in larger sizes, which is super unfortunate because think about all these things that, you are barred access to simply because of your size. So that obviously I'll defer to Marisa on this one in terms of like impact of that on your mental health. But I know for me, like as somebody who does a lot of outdoor things, that's definitely something that's always kind of front of mind for me.
Yeah, I remember literally being left out of photos because I couldn't wear the brand that all of my friends were wearing. And they were like, yeah, but you don't, like, your outfit doesn't match, so you can't be in the photos. And those types of moments are so difficult to deal with.
I really think though that compared to when I was younger and now, there's been so much work by like organizations, like groups like yours, where it has changed a lot. And for younger women and just younger patients in general, I feel like there's a difference. And that has impacted everyone, where I feel like if I see an ad for a company and the women all look like skinny models, then I don't want to buy clothes from them. Like there's just no excuse for doing it anymore. It's too exclusionary, and people feel like you can't exist in the world. So when we talk about mental health, I think human beings are social and we want to be part of communities. And if you feel like you can't be, it's terrible. It's horrible for people's mental health. And it's one of the big reasons why people become really depressed. And then it influences all of these things like eating disorders and other ways that then we try to cope with that feeling in ways that aren't healthy.
Something you touched on, which I thought was important, which is, being aware and mindful of the ways that brands are marketing or even what sizes they go up to, because that's something as an ally, like seek out brands that have extended sizes, seek out brands that are showing representation, not only of different body types, but also, like just a whole range of different things, whether it's race or, differently abled bodies, just different things. Like seek those brands out and encourage them so they continue doing that work. If you guys want to jump in and talk about some other ways or experiences that you've had with people being allies for you.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of put your money where your mouth is. And buying clothes is one of the best ways to do that, whether you are plus size or straight size. I think straight size people have a lot more effect on that space right now because they are going to be what sways the market towards size inclusive shopping, since the plus size shoppers are already there. I tell the story of a friend of mine who I grew up with, who's now my best friend, who went into the mall with me and purposefully made sure every store we went in offered clothes in my size. So I got to spend a day at the mall like anyone else, and I didn't have to worry about if I was going to be able to shop in every store that we went into. And it was moments like those that were super impactful on me growing up, and I think is such a great way to be an ally to larger bodies.
For sure. Does anybody else have anything they want to chime in to add to that?
I would just say, just going back to what we were talking about before in terms of amplifying voices, I think that's kind of the core for me on allyship, is really amplifying those with different perspectives than you, and especially those who fall under deeper marginalizations and intersections. And I think when you take the time to do that, it has the biggest impact and the best impact. So I think that's really important. but just across the board to really amplify other voices, because we have to remember that our perspective is so limited. No matter how many conversations we have, if we don't have a lived experience, we can only understand so much. And we need to understand when it's our time to talk and when it's our time to listen. And I think people need to do a lot more listening than talking. And so that would definitely be kind of my center message there, is to really amplify other voices and intently seek out other perspectives. I think a lot of times people will wait until something big happens to amplify someone to try to learn, but we should be really proactive in doing that. And I think that's what shows a good ally, someone who is proactive and intently seeks out amplifying other people. And it's very easy to recognize someone who does that rather than someone who falls on the line of being performative.
Absolutely. And also I think the biggest piece for somebody who seeks to be an ally is to educate yourself. Like, don't expect members of those marginalized communities to be the one to do the labor for you and explain why something should matter, or, different things. And I think it's okay to ask questions, but show that you're making an effort first. Take that first step, do some research on your own. And then if you're confused about something or whatever the case may be, then ask some questions, but don't just come in with the mindset that people should have to explain things to you. Definitely, if you seek to be an ally, the biggest first step, I think, of that is to educate yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you don't want to ever, you don't want to ever ask someone who falls under, a deep marginalization to exert emotional labor for your benefit when it's something that you can easily find online or easily educate yourself on. So I think that's the important thing, is a lot of times people will ask others to do the work for them. And I think being a good ally means doing it for yourself first.
And then in terms, since both you guys have built communities, for yourselves, but also, the world at large, like, why do you think that aspect of community is so important, especially like your representation within that community?
I think in my view and in my life, community is everything, especially for people who have felt alone for a majority of their lives. And I think that's why all of this work is so important, because if you ask any plus size person or any person who has lived in any marginalized body, if they felt alone growing up, 90% of them will say yes, because 90% of them were alone. They were always the other. And I think being the other often gives you a very negative mindset about yourself, that when you're able to actually connect with a community for the first time who understands and who allows you to just breathe and talk and feel seen, it is the most transformative thing. And I have personally experienced that, and I know so many people have. And so that's, I think, the most special thing about a community, is getting able to feel that transformative power for the first time. And then feeling so embraced and knowing that there's somewhere where you can go where you are not the other, but you are the norm. And so I think that's why community is so important. And that's why social media has helped in that aspect to bring people together in a way that has never happened before. Because when you can so easily connect with someone who understands everything without you having to explain it, it's the most refreshing feeling possible.
Yeah, I think the end of what Gianluca said was exactly how I feel, in the sense of not having to go into every space and plan to explain every decision you have made, every action you have. I don't join conversations with certain people when it comes to fashion and clothing, because I don't want to have to explain the entire world of the fact that I can't shop at the stores they're talking about and that certain things aren't offered to me. That's just mentally exhausting. And for my own sake, I remove myself from those conversations, which is really isolating. And so to be able to have a space you can walk into and not have to do that introductory explanation, put in that extra mental effort, and truly just have the conversation that you want to have, that all of your friends can normally have sitting around a table, is really, really refreshing and frankly life-changing for a lot of people.
Yeah, there is a question that came in for you, Marisa, about that kind of sense of belonging and how that relates to mental health, and even self-esteem, as that all kind of connects to one another.
Yeah, and I think I think the most important concept here is the concept of attachment. And so this is really important for people's mental health. And so you're able to make a secure, safe attachment to people around you. And that's both important on an individual level, like who is my friend or my partner, but also the community level. And I think there is something to the idea that when you you get exhausted by the cognitive load of being someplace where you constantly have to question whether or not you can do that with people, or you can just relax and do it. And it's an incredible amount of stress. And I understand how it can become that you wonder whether it's worth the effort after a little while. And so really having some places to relieve that is really important. And it's important to feel part of it, that people love you as you are.
Definitely. That's like, there's a group of plus size triathletes that I'm a part of. And like, that was a game changer for me as a triathlete. Cause when I first started, I was like, cool. Nobody here looks like me. This is real awkward. There's like no people of color and no plus size people. So I really stick out a lot. So finding that community was such a huge game changer for me, and feeling comfortable and then really going after my goals and like, stepping into that part of who I was becoming as a triathlete, which like still kind of feels weird to say, but that aspect of community is just so important to not only on your own journey, but to also help others, because once they see you, doing certain things or accomplishing things, then others feel encouraged to do the same, which I think is also really important.
You have the mental resources to help other people when you feel more secure too. It is critical for people not to be anxious all the time and questioning themselves all the time.
Yeah, especially that anxiety as it relates to shopping. Like that is such like so tied into self-esteem, especially as you're younger, like having difficulty. Even I remember like being young, and most of, girls that I went to school with were shopping in the junior section. I was like, yeah, I don't fit into that. So I'm going to go to the women's section where there's nobody. There's not really any homecoming dresses, but hopefully I find something. And so it's this really alienating experience, right? Especially navigating that as a younger person, trying to figure out what to do, or like, am I still going to look cool if I get this dress that like somebody's mom probably wore to a wedding? I don't know, but I'll make it work. So definitely, I think that ties in so much with self-esteem. I don't know if you have anything, Charlotte or Gianluca, that you want to add to that.
Yeah, truly. I mean, physically being sent to the back corner of a store is a very demoralizing experience, to have to like remove yourself and to go to the back, and then not even find great stuff when you're there. I totally relate with that. I remember being so scared to go prom dress shopping. I was convinced I was only going to do it online and wasn't even going to get the experience of trying on clothes until a friend of mine's mom texted me and let me know that a local shop had plus size prom dresses, and she was like, you should go check it out. But it is stores are designed to sort of isolate plus size people in really, really upsetting and problematic ways.
Yeah. And I know, Gianluca, I know that's something that you kind of seek to work on, is being, an advocate for change in that, and trying to work with some brands. I don't know, I don't want to like give too much away if you're not like talking about that yet in terms of long-term goals, but if you kind of want to speak a little bit, whatever you're comfortable with on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even today, we are seeing so many brands that are hesitant to expand their size range, or to extend into the plus size market. And I think, now more than ever, we have an abundance of information that shows why it's important. So a lot of it now is reworking the inners of a brand and help them to really understand why exactly this customer needs to be served and deserves to be, and what that kind of return on investment is there. So I think a lot of brands now are trying it. A lot of them are doing it wrong, and I think that's because they don't talk about the community aspect. And I think the key to really serving this customer is to center her in the conversation. So those brands that are actually able to look at this community, connect with them, and use the community inside the brand are the ones who are able to make the most long-lasting change and impact, and who develop trust within the community. And I think once you're able to develop trust, that's kind of the best thing. So whether it's working with, top influencers and consultants within the community who know exactly what this customer wants, or going directly to the community and having these really frank and open conversations, I think more brands need to do that and just be more transparent with the process, but also to pick up the pace, of course. And things are much slower than they should be in this regard. But it's something that I, of course, have worked on, and I've consulted with many brands, and we continue to do that. And we just hope to bring kind of our community aspect to the brand and to show them what exactly this customer wants, what she's waiting for, and why she deserves to be seen more now than ever. So that's kind of our hope, is to be able to really open brands' eyes and to show them the importance here, because you can give them all the facts they want, but if they can't understand the real message and the real importance, they'll never be able to tackle this market in a really impactful way.
Yeah, and something that you mentioned there relates to one of the questions I just saw in the chat, which is, what brands are doing it well, and what influencers are a good source to follow to get some of that content that relates to body positivity, or advocating for differently sized people. So if there's any brands that you love or people that you think everyone should follow, if anyone has anything to throw out there.
I mean, obviously Gianluca and I, Keep the Curves and Power Plus, we're both trying to do that, both amplifying those voices. I really love following Gabby Fresh. I think she's been really authentic and put out some really cool clothes in collaboration with some other brands that I have really loved. It's hard. There's a lot of smaller clothing brands I really like. There's one called Smart Glamour that is doing some really cool stuff around size inclusive shopping. And I mentioned this the last time I talked to Natalie, but Ula Popkin, which goes very far in their size inclusive range. And I really have loved their stuff. I think it really comes down to like your personal style, though. I don't love to like recommend one specific brand, because I think it makes it seem like, one store will fit everyone's needs, and that's not totally the case. But I'd love to hear who Gianluca.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many people, but I think in terms of brands, I really love what Eloquy is doing right now. I think they're doing some great initiatives around the intersection of race and size. That's really important. And so I really love the way that Eloquy has tackled that conversation over the past year. And there are, of course, some similar brands as well that are trying to do good. I think Fashion to Figure has a really good view on who their customer is and how to support, especially marginalized influencers within the Plus community, especially, Black influencers within the Plus community. So I think they're great. The people I look to, I mean, I love Gabby Gregg as well. I think I also look to Nicolette Mason a lot. She's really great. Some other people I love, Kelly Brown is a great one, and Lyris Cross is one of my favorite people who's a model who speaks out on this a lot. I think the great thing is if you go to any one of their Instagrams, within maybe 5 seconds, you'll be able to see a list of other people to follow, because everyone is so interconnected. And I think that's what's great, is just by going and following Gabby Gregg on Instagram, you'll automatically be able to see everyone else that she follows and has regular conversations with. So I think that's always a great thing, is to find one person you really resonate with and then see who they're connected to. And then you kind of just spiral from there. And that's what's definitely helped me the most, to connect with people and find people who I think have incredible perspectives that need to be talked about and presented more.
Yeah. And for the athletic side, so somebody mentioned that one of the brands that I think is doing really well with that is Super Fit Hero. They have extended sizes, probably the most extensive I've seen from any athletic wear brand. Another is Our Sport, where they have specifically tailored things towards Athena triathlete, means any triathlete, well, female triathlete that's 165 pounds or over, which like is a whole other conversation that you have to get weighed in at a race in order to be considered Athena. But Our Sport, that's how they started. That's, their main focus is Athena athlete. So both of those brands I think are doing really well in terms of creating athletic wear that's really inclusive. In terms of influencers in the athletic space, I love Myrna Valerio. So if you guys are not following her, definitely check out Myrna. She is incredible. Another one who also posts a lot of workouts is Moritz Summers, who I love. So those would be, and Kanoa Green, those would be my suggestions for things, people to follow or brands to follow within the athletic space. Somebody just said Meg Boggs as well.
Amazing. I love her.
All right. Sorry, I'm trying to also scroll through questions here. So the other part of that question was about what you think of body positivity across gender norms. So this is something we did kind of touch on, that, typically in general, men are allowed to take up space, but women aren't. So like, how does anybody we'll start with Marisa, if you have thoughts on that.
I mean, I have to say my experience from working with patients is that the male patients do have some of the same experiences as the women. And that some of it is though this intersectional phenomenon where it's a combination of their gender, their race, how their body is perceived. And men certainly, I think sometimes they get away with it a little bit more and it's less painful for them, or they're just trained to not be as aware of it in some cases. But I'm not sure it's always true.
I would add to that too, that I think that when you talk about, so we're talking about looking past gender norms. So if we're looking at men specifically, the issue there, if you're looking at body image, is much more tied into toxic masculinity than we're talking about with women. So kind of to your point, Marissa, it is a different experience. There are kind of the things that are similar, but it's the reason behind it that's different. And so there are many studies on the fact that as you add more weight to the body, you lose traditionally masculine features, which leads you to being viewed as not man enough. And so much of the body dysmorphia and body image issues there is tied to this feeling of not being man enough because of the way media and Hollywood and all of the above has presented what a man looks like. And so that's a really big issue that I think men face, whereas women, of course, are not going to face that issue. So there are similarities, and I think there's much more similar than people realize, but there are these big differences that have to be tackled. And of course, statistically, we know that men open up about these issues like body image much less likely to talk about them than women are as well. And so they're much more likely to internalize them, which then leads, of course, to hidden mental health disorders and eating disorders and higher suicide rates and all these other things. So it is two very different things, but I think it's important to increase the conversation, beyond gender norms. So then, of course, if you look at the trans and non-binary community, their experiences are going to be much different. So I think all of this messaging that we've been talking about mental health and body positivity and self-love is so applicable to all genders and beyond the binary. And it's definitely important to deconstruct that and realize how it will impact everyone differently.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I have a fair number, or have treated over the years, a fair number of non-binary or trans patients. And for them, exactly what you said is very important, that several of my patients have developed eating disorder problems because they feel if their weight goes up, then they look more feminine. And it's really, really, really painful for them. And it can be very difficult to manage when you have an intersection of not just the size, but also thinking about how that makes you look gendered in one way or another way.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's so complicated. And I think there's so many layers to it, right? And there's so much that we're still learning and that people are still learning, but it's a really important point of conversation. And I'm glad that you've seen that as well, because I think it's something that a lot of people don't talk about, but it really, harms people. And it's something that feels so taboo, but is really so relevant for so many.
Yeah. And I think from the clothing side of it, there is some sort of silver lining and excitingness around the fact that a lot of brands that are working to become more size inclusive, or that are with the goal of being size inclusive, are also considering other parts of marginalized communities within that conversation. So I think we've seen a push of these smaller brands that are coming out with size inclusive clothing, that are also coming out with clothing that has more of a range of styles, from feminine to masculine to more androgynous clothing, which has been, I think, reaffirming in a lot of really cool ways. Or even brands I've noticed that are moving away from separating female and male sizing and just using measurements so that anyone can buy the clothes and it doesn't feel like you have to go into a female section or a male section. So I think there is a really cool space from the clothing industry where there's such a change happening to become more size inclusive, that within that change, we can also become more inclusive to people of all different identities.
And then this one also, Dr. Toups, how does one find a therapist who is body positive and can talk people living in bodies of all sizes? Because that's something not from a mental health aspect, but even from medical health, like finding, a generalist that is not going to automatically tell you that every health problem you have is because of your weight, but looking at you as a holistic human being that, encompasses a lot of different things.
Okay, so I'm just going to be honest, this is hard. And it's hard because depending on where you live in the country, it may be difficult to find a therapist at all. Certainly in Texas, we have a shortage, and it's not easy ever. So these days, the internet is a great resource. There are a lot of therapists. So the biggest online place to just find, a directory of mental health providers is probably the Psychology Today's website. And more people will list in their profile if they have either special populations that they're interested in, or just that they, they'll put statements affirming that they're open to or positive about different marginalized groups. And so that can be a reasonably good place to start. And then follow through on people's websites and talk to them. I think really, in practice, what happens is that once somebody finds one person, then we all network with each other. And so just like many of my patients are like, oh yeah, I know who the endocrinologist for people who, want to be on hormones is in Austin. And I know who the person who, is really good with patients who struggled with being told things by their gynecologist about their fertility because they're overweight. Like, we know who the professionals know who we are. And so once you get in that network, ask the people that you know and trust about who they think are good and know and trust.
I think that's such a huge part of it, is finding somebody who not only will listen to you and also accept that, and, listen to who you are as a human being without taking your size into account, that that's not part of the equation, and really, taking it seriously when you talk to them about symptoms or anything that you're having, and not just automatically like, oh, if you lost weight, it would get better.
And I also want to say, it isn't, this is sort of like the conversation people often have about race, where you say, well, I don't see that. And it's not that I don't see it. Because sometimes it's really important for patients to have you be where they can talk to you about it. And it is important. And many of my patients come to me because this has been a big issue for them, like for all the reasons that we talked about. They feel marginalized, they feel hurt, they've had horrible experiences with their family sometimes. The parents who tell their children, like, you'll never find a husband if you keep eating like that, are still out there. And it's terrible, and they're traumatized. So I want to get a balance where we don't attribute everything to that, but we let it take up the space it needs to in their treatment for whatever that is.
I don't know, Gianluca or Charlotte, if either of you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I would just say, I think she really nailed it on the head. Marissa did a great job of explaining that. I just think I would add to, just to circle back to where we started this conversation tonight on the topic about language. When you are looking at their websites and reaching out and having initial phone calls, to be very aware of the language they're using, because you can tell a lot very quickly from how they speak. So to ask deliberate questions and to really vet someone, and to really understand, you can tell so much from the words that they use and the way that they speak, and to really get into that before you kind of feel locked in. I think that's important too in the whole process of doing that.
Most therapists and psychiatrists will talk to people, for like a free phone consultation, to have a chance for people to get to know us. And I agree, it's totally important to ask the questions that you need of somebody before you commit to being their patient.
Right.
Especially when you're going to be so vulnerable with them, it's important to have, at least somewhat of a connection to be able to build that trust to get to that point.
Yeah, and I think also along the lines of those references, when you are in situations where you're going to a new doctor, and many times it's based off of a recommendation from a previous doctor, to make sure that that's something you bring up and ask your doctor and say, okay, who do you recommend, knowing that this is something I really care about and need? Because I know I've been in the case where doctors sort of have someone that they blanket recommend, but when I specifically go and ask the question, I say, okay, but I want someone who's good in this regard, who I can talk about in my body in healthy ways, and my weight isn't going to dictate the conversation over everything else. Then they can sometimes switch who they're going to recommend, to be like, actually, you might work better with this doctor. So advocating for yourself also in that recommendation phase can help, so you're not spending all your time talking to 7 different doctors until you finally get to one that you feel comfortable with. That can cut down on that time.
So what do you think about vanity sizing and the impact it has on fashion, expectations, and body image? Like if my dress says 8, why don't larger sizes continue that? Shouldn't a 20 say 16? Does this distort straight size people's treatment of plus size clothes / people?
Personally, I think vanity sizing is this weird band-aid to a bigger problem we should be talking about, which is the fact that we're assigning a value to what that number is to start with. I think in an ideal world, sizes are sizes. They should be universal across brands, and they're just to make sure that the clothes you're wearing fit your body. End of story. And I think the act of vanity sizing is also giving power to the narrative that smaller is better, that you want to have a lower number, which is very detrimental to the plus size community. So I think it should just not exist to start with across straight sizes or plus sizes.
It would make much more sense if they just sized everything by like the actual measurements.
Yeah,
that would be so better and less confusing. Yes. You would actually have a better idea whether or not something would fit.
Yes. I don't even think there's consistent sizing across brands anyway. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, exactly. No. I think of men's pants and the fact that my brother can go buy things based off of the inches of his waist and the inches of his inseam, and that's the end of it. And I get to play a fun game of order everything in 3 sizes and hope that one of them fits. And then I actually keep in my notes app what size I am in different stores because it is so hard to keep track of and varies so much. So yeah, I would love a universal sizing system.
I think even that gets difficult. Like I guess I can't speak for men because I've never shopped for men's clothing, but I would imagine that if you are a man who, whose body type isn't like a typical, straight size, like this height to weight, like waist size to inseam ratio doesn't work, that could be really difficult as well. If your body is proportioned differently. And that's the same for women, that it can be really difficult depending on the proportion of your body to find things that fit well. And often you have to get stuff that's custom made just to really, that you feel good and comfortable in it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Gianluca,
I'm a very short person, and I can tell you that is also, it's true in many ways that this way clothes are made is not made thoughtful about the bodies that are actually going to wear them. And I completely get it's that I haven't had the same experiences that you guys have, but I do understand enough of it to say it doesn't make sense that we can't just have clothes that tell you how big they are. Like what?
Now, like, what does a size large mean? What is that?
Yeah.
And why is women's sizing so awful when it comes to shirts? Like, why?
Like, why can men get pants that they know how long the inseam is, but women's pants, it's a mystery how long.
And there's variance. I think that is one thing I've always been jealous of, is the idea that like a guy can change size of something by going up in the waist, but not going up in the inseam, or vice versa. Whereas I'm lucky that I'm like the average height. So normally lengths are okay on me, but there's so many things where I'm like, I wish I could up my chest size, but not up the arms, or those like individual measurements. And sizing garments that way would be so useful, because I know I talked to Natalie about, in terms of cuts, you look at the cut of a size small versus a size large versus a size 3X, and somehow like they just go bigger in inches, and no one thinks about the fact that the weight gets distributed different ways, and all of a sudden a pattern that was great on a size small, when you just add inches on either side, no longer looks great in a size 3X, despite it being the same clothing item.
Yeah, those proportions are significantly different as you get into different sizes. So we are getting close to the end of our time. So if each of you has something that you kind of like want to leave people with, or things, if you want to, Gianluca, talk about your book a little bit, just anything that you want to leave people with, whether that's, things that you're excited about that you're working towards, or even just a final thought. We'll start with you, Gianluca.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me today. It was so great to have this conversation. I always love having like really, thoughtful conversations like these. I think they have a great impact. And so thank you for having me. Yeah, I think my final thing here is just going back to just a message of worth that we talked before. And I think that's so important to remember in all of this as we each go on our individual journeys, is to always remember that and to give ourselves the space to grow and to feel things and to just be ourselves and to learn who exactly we are. And kind of that quality of authenticity has become so commercialized, unfortunately, but it really is so powerful when you're able to live your life authentically. So I hope that everyone can do that and continue to push towards that. Yes, in terms of me, I have a book coming out next summer called The Power of Plus, which is tied to our community, of course, and is about the evolution of plus size fashion, and specifically about the women who have built this community over the past 20 years. And so it tells their stories in a way that they haven't been able to do before. So that'll be out next summer. And of course, if you follow our community on Instagram, you will be updated once you are able to pre-order and get that. But yeah, I hope to continue to have more conversations like these and whatever things I have planned for the next year and a half and are able to do. I hope we can continue to have these really kind of impactful and thought-provoking conversations.
Marisa, if you want to go next.
Well, I also just want to say I've enjoyed this opportunity. And usually when people ask me to give this kind of statement, and particularly when we're talking about self-worth and value, from my perspective as a clinician, I always want people to know that if you're struggling, to remember that you're worth and you deserve to get people's help. And so I know that not every provider is great and that people have had bad experiences with physicians and psychiatrists and therapists, but you deserve to get help if you need it. So if there's anybody out here who's really struggling and they need it, don't be afraid to ask for it. And to, like, we all talked about all these things. Maybe you have to talk to 10 therapists, but you should do it because you deserve to find a good one.
Charlotte, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think to sort of pull it all together, I think it really does come back to community and the people you surround yourself with, whether that's mental health professionals, whether that's just friends, whether that's people on the internet. Having that network to support you at the end of the day is what's going to make it easier to go on that journey of self-love and to define that self-worth for yourself, and to seek out those communities wherever you can. If you are plus size, find Power of Plus, find Cue the Curves, find these spaces that you can join and really connect with. If there are other communities you're looking for, seek them out. That is one of the beauties of the internet, and you truly can find them. And it is a game changer once you join them and really buy into this larger support network of people who really care for you and want the best for you.
Absolutely. I think like the biggest by and large thing for me is that like you're worthy, you are worthy, and give yourself permission to feel that, right? Like don't feel like you need to hold back, that like you need to wait to do something, like, oh, I can't do that, I need to lose weight before I do that, or that I don't deserve nice things or fancy things or whatever the case may be. Like you're worthy exactly where you're at right now. And honestly, and I can say this about everybody, like the number on the scale is the least interesting thing about you. Like that should have no bearing whatsoever on who you are as a person. And I tell people that all the time. I'm like, really, my dress size, the number on the scale, all like none of that is important. I have way cooler things going on in my life that shouldn't matter. So just really, like appreciate where you are. And that doesn't mean that you have to like, oh, I love myself and I'm the greatest. Sometimes it's just a matter of, like being at peace with yourself and appreciating what you've been able to accomplish thus far, and, have some hope for what that means for the future. So I'm super thankful for all three of you. I appreciate you. Thank you for sharing your time with us this evening. It has been incredible. I really enjoyed it. And I hope everybody else got some thought-provoking, things to take back with them. Especially, I'm really going to take that with me, that you are in a long-term relationship with yourself. So that's something you need to work on and kind of like help yourself through. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you all. I also agree with that. Learning that it's just yourself and you, I mean, obviously we learned a lot about like leaning into other people, but at the end of the day, like it's about taking care of yourself. And that's what today has been about, is taking care of our brains. And we hope that today you learned a lot, got some resources, you made some new friends, and you can continue on this journey of like finding great people, finding great communities. We've already found so many today, and to just continue on this journey to take care of yourself and take care of everyone else too in your life. So thank you to all the speakers tonight. It was so great to just listen in. I feel so great just ending this evening with everything that you guys brought to the table. So thank you. Thank you, Natalie, for moderating tonight. And we will see you all soon. We are always doing so much. Feel free to reach out to the Sweat Life team. We love chatting with you. We love talking with you all. So that's it. Thank you all. Have a great evening.